The champagne glass slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor of my childhood home, as my father's words echoed through the dining room. Face it, Marcus. You're 32 years old, still chasing pipe dreams, and you've got nothing to show for it. When are you going to grow up and get a real job? The silence that followed was deafening. 23 family members sat frozen around the elaborate Christmas dinner table, their conversations halted mid-sentence. My mother's perfectly orchestrated holiday gathering had just become the stage for my public humiliation. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. But what they didn't know was that in exactly 47 minutes, everything would change. My business partner would walk through that front door with news that would transform not just my life, but their entire understanding of what success really meant. The morning of December 24th started like every Christmas Eve for the past 15 years in the Richardson family household. I woke up in my old childhood bedroom, surrounded by faded posters of baseball players I'd idolized in high school and participation trophies that now seemed to mock my current situation. The room hadn't changed since I graduated, frozen in time, like a museum exhibit of adolescent ambition. My mother, Patricia Richardson, had been cooking since dawn. The aroma of her famous herb-crusted turkey wafted through the house, mixing with the scent of fresh pine from the 12-foot Christmas tree that dominated the living room. Every decoration was placed with military precision, every surface polished to perfection. This was her stage, and Christmas dinner was her annual performance. I pulled on the navy blazer I'd bought specifically for family gatherings. Not expensive enough to seem pretentious, not cheap enough to invite commentary about my finances. Everything in my relationship with my family required this careful calibration, this constant navigation between appearing successful enough to avoid pity and modest enough to avoid suspicion about where the money came from. The truth was, they had no idea what I actually did for work. For the past 3 years, I'd been deliberately vague about my professional life, describing it in generic terms that satisfied their surface-level curiosity without inviting deeper scrutiny. I'm in tech consulting, I'd say, or I help businesses optimize their digital presence. These phrases meant nothing and everything, providing enough specificity to sound legitimate while revealing absolutely nothing about the reality of my situation. That reality was complicated. 6 months earlier, my college roommate Tyler Chen had approached me with an idea that seemed too ambitious to succeed. He'd developed a software platform that could revolutionize how small businesses manage their inventory and customer relationships, but he needed someone to handle the business development and client acquisition side. Someone who understood people, who could translate technical capabilities into practical solutions that business owners could understand and trust. I'd been working as a freelance marketing consultant at the time, barely making enough to cover my studio apartment rent. In downtown Portland, the work was inconsistent, the clients were often difficult, and I spent more time chasing payments than actually doing the work I'd been hired to do. When Tyler offered me a 50-50 partnership in his startup, I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. The problem was explaining this to my family. My father, Robert Richardson, had built his identity around traditional measures of success. He'd worked for the same insurance company for 37 years, climbing steadily through the ranks until he reached regional manager. His office walls were covered with certificates and awards recognizing his achievements, tangible proof of his value and competence. He understood salary structures, benefit packages, corporate hierarchies, and performance reviews. He did not understand equity stakes, revenue sharing, or the concept of building something from nothing. My older brother, David, had followed a path that made perfect sense to my father. MBA from Northwestern, management consulting for 5 years, then corporate strategy at a Fortune 500 company. He owned a house in an expensive Chicago suburb, drove a German luxury car, and sent his 2 children to private schools. His success was quantifiable, visible, and easily explained at cocktail parties. My younger sister Sarah had chosen medicine. She was finishing her residency in pediatrics at Johns Hopkins, working 100-hour weeks and complaining constantly about her exhaustion. But everyone understood that she was building toward something prestigious and well-compensated. Her struggles were temporary, her future secure. And then there was me. Marcus Richardson, the middle child who'd majored in communications, bounced between various marketing jobs, and now claimed to be building a business that no one could quite understand or verify. To my family, I looked like someone who'd never figured out how to translate college into a real career, someone who was still searching for direction while his siblings had already found their paths. The irony was that Tyler and I had been gaining real traction over the past few months. Our software platform had attracted attention from business owners who were frustrated with expensive, complicated systems that required extensive training and ongoing technical support. We'd focused on creating something intuitive enough for a small restaurant owner or retail shop manager to implement immediately, powerful enough to actually improve their operations, and affordable enough to represent genuine value rather than a major financial risk. We'd started with a handful of beta clients who'd agreed to test the platform in exchange for significant discounts on their first year of service. The feedback had been overwhelmingly positive. Not just polite encouragement, but genuine enthusiasm from business owners who said our system had saved them hours of administrative work each week and helped them identify trends in their sales, data that they'd never noticed before. Word had begun spreading organically through business owner networks. Our beta clients were recommending us to their friends and colleagues, and we were getting inquiries from companies we'd never contacted directly. Tyler had been working 18-hour days refining the platform based on user feedback, while I'd been traveling constantly, meeting with potential clients and learning about their specific needs and challenges. 3 weeks earlier, we'd received an email that had the potential to change everything. A venture capital firm in San Francisco had heard about our platform through one of their portfolio companies and wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss potential investment. Not just a small angel investment to help us get started, but a funding round that could provide the capital we needed to scale rapidly and compete with established players in the market. The meeting was scheduled for December 27th, just 3 days after Christmas. We'd been preparing obsessively, refining our pitch deck, practicing our presentation, and researching everything we could about the investors and their decision-making criteria. This wasn't just an opportunity to secure funding, it was validation. That our idea had real commercial potential. That we weren't just 2 guys with a clever piece of software, but founders of what could become a significant business. But I couldn't tell my family any of this. Not yet. Not until we knew whether the meeting would result in actual investment. I'd learned years ago that sharing preliminary good news with my family often backfired. They'd either dismiss it as unlikely to materialize, or they'd build expectations that became uncomfortable if things didn't work out as anticipated. Better to wait until I had concrete results to share. The dining room was already bustling with activity when I came downstairs around 10 o'clock. My aunts and uncles had arrived early to help with preparations, though help mostly meant standing around drinking coffee and offering suggestions that my mother politely ignored. The Richardson family Christmas had grown over the years to include not just immediate family, but aunts, uncles, cousins, and various family friends who'd become honorary relatives through decades of shared holidays. My cousin Bradley was holding court near the kitchen island, describing his recent promotion to senior associate at his law firm. At 28, he was already earning more than most people made in their peak earning years, and he had the easy confidence that came from knowing his career trajectory was both impressive and secure. His younger brother Kevin was finishing his MBA at Wharton and had already accepted a position with an investment bank in Manhattan. This was the context in which I existed during family gatherings, surrounded by relatives who'd achieved traditional forms of success, who could articulate their professional accomplishments in terms that everyone understood and respected, who never had to explain or justify their career choices because those choices aligned perfectly with societal expectations about what constituted a valuable and respectable life. "Marcus!" my Aunt Linda called out as I entered the kitchen. "I was just telling Bradley about your computer work. He was saying his firm is always looking for technology consultants. Maybe you two should talk about opportunities." The suggestion was well-meaning but highlighted exactly the dynamic I found most frustrating. My family's attempts to help invariably involved trying to connect me with traditional employment opportunities, as though the problem with my career was simply that I hadn't found the right job yet. They couldn't conceive that I might be choosing to build something rather than join something, that I might be pursuing equity rather than salary, that I might be willing to accept uncertainty in exchange for the possibility of creating something significant. "Thanks, Aunt Linda," I replied, diplomatically. "I'll keep that in mind." Bradley approached with his characteristic blend of confidence and condescension. "What kind of tech consulting are you doing these days, Marcus? The market's been really interesting lately, especially around cybersecurity and data analytics." This was always the moment I dreaded. The follow-up questions revealed how little substance existed behind my vague professional descriptions. Bradley wasn't trying to be malicious. He was genuinely curious about my work and possibly even interested in understanding how his legal expertise might connect with technology trends. But I couldn't explain what Tyler and I were actually building without raising questions I wasn't ready to answer. "Mostly helping small businesses optimize their operations," I said, which was technically true but completely inadequate as an explanation. "Digital transformation, process improvement, that kind of thing." Bradley nodded politely, but I could see his interest fading. My answer was too generic, too consultant speak, to sustain a meaningful conversation. He'd asked a specific question and received a response that could have applied to dozens of different types of work. In his world of billable hours and partnership tracks, that kind of vagueness suggested either someone who didn't really understand their own profession or someone who didn't have much of a profession to understand. The morning continued with similar interactions, family members making polite inquiries about my work, me providing answers that were truthful but incomplete, conversations trailing off as people realized I wasn't offering the kind of substantive professional discussion they'd hoped for. By noon, I could feel the familiar weight of family disappointment settling around me like a fog. My father appeared in the kitchen doorway, surveying the controlled chaos of holiday meal preparation with the satisfaction of someone whose organizational efforts had created this smoothly functioning system. He caught my eye and gestured toward his home office with a slight nod, our signal for a private conversation. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Robert Richardson's home office was a shrine to conventional success. The walls were covered with framed certificates, awards, and photographs documenting his progression through various leadership roles at the insurance company. His desk was an enormous mahogany piece that had belonged to his father, polished to a mirror shine, and organized with the precision of someone who believed that external order reflected internal competence. "Close the door, son," he said, settling into his leather chair with the weight of someone who'd spent decades making important decisions from behind impressive desks. "I wanted to talk to you before everyone sits down for dinner." I knew this conversation was coming. It happened at every major family gathering, sometimes explicitly and sometimes through pointed questions and meaningful glances. The conversation about my future, my career trajectory, my plans for achieving the kind of stability and success that would allow him to speak proudly about his middle son's accomplishments. "I've been thinking about our discussion since Thanksgiving," he began, referring to a conversation where he'd expressed concern about my lack of clear professional direction. "You mentioned you were working on some kind of business venture. But you didn't provide many details. This was my father's diplomatic way of saying that my explanation had been unsatisfying, that he'd detected evasiveness in my responses and wanted more substantive information about what I was actually doing. With my time and energy, it's still in development, I said carefully. Too early to make any definitive statements about where it's heading? Marcus. His tone carried the patient frustration of someone who'd had this conversation before. You're 32 years old. You can't keep treating your career like an experiment indefinitely. At some point, you need to commit to something that provides real security and growth potential. The word real hit me like a physical blow. Real security, real growth potential, real career. The implication was clear. Whatever I was doing didn't qualify as real in his assessment. It was preliminary, temporary, practice for the eventual moment when I would settle into something that met his criteria for legitimate professional activity. I understand your concern, I replied, fighting to keep my voice level. But building something takes time. Not everything follows a linear corporate progression. Building what exactly? He pressed. You've been vague about this business idea for months. If it's legitimate, if it has real potential, why can't you explain it clearly? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with years of accumulated frustration and disappointment. He wasn't wrong to ask for clarity. Any reasonable person would want to understand what their child was actually doing professionally, especially when that child was in their 30s and still seemed to be figuring things out. But I couldn't explain Tyler's software platform without revealing how much potential it represented. And I couldn't discuss the potential without creating expectations that might not materialize. The venture capital meeting was still 3 days away. We didn't know whether the investors would be genuinely interested, or whether our pitch would resonate with their investment criteria. Everything was still theoretical, still dependent on variables beyond our control. It's a technology platform for small businesses, I said finally. Inventory management and customer relationship tools designed specifically for companies that don't have dedicated IT support. My father leaned back in his chair, considering this information with the same analytical approach he brought to insurance risk assessment. And you're what? A co-founder? An employee? A consultant? Co-founder. Equal partnership with the developer. What's your revenue model? How many clients do you have? What's your timeline for profitability? The questions came rapid fire, reflecting both his business experience and his growing concern about the viability of what I was describing. These were exactly the kinds of questions the venture capital investors would ask in 3 days, and I had confident answers for all of them. But sharing those answers with my father would require explaining the entire scope of what Tyler and I were building, including the investment meeting and the potential for significant scaling. We're in the beta phase with several clients, I said, which was true but incomplete. The revenue model is subscription-based with tiered pricing depending on company size and feature requirements. He nodded slowly, but I could see skepticism in his expression. Beta phase sounded like a euphemism for not actually making money yet. Subscription-based revenue model sounded like consultant jargon for theoretical income at some undefined point in the future. Marcus, I'm not trying to discourage you from pursuing your interests, he said, though his tone suggested exactly the opposite. But at your age, you need to be realistic about the probability of success for new business ventures. The statistics are not encouraging. Most startups fail within the first 2 years. I know the statistics, I replied, perhaps more sharply than I'd intended. But I also know that some businesses succeed. Someone has to be in that percentage. Someone does, he agreed. But usually someone with more business experience, more capital, more industry connections. You're a smart guy, but intelligence isn't enough. You need practical advantages that I don't see you having. The conversation was following its familiar script. My father expressed reasonable concerns based on statistical realities and conventional wisdom. Me defending choices. that I couldn't fully justify without revealing information I wasn't ready to share. Both of us are becoming increasingly frustrated with the other's apparent unwillingness to acknowledge obvious truths. "Look," he said finally. "David mentioned that his company is expanding their marketing department. He could put in a word for you, help you get an interview. It wouldn't be entry level. Your experience would count for something. You could probably start as a senior marketing specialist, maybe even a manager role if you interviewed well." The offer was genuine and generous. David worked for a respected company, and his recommendation would carry significant weight in their hiring process. A senior marketing position would provide the kind of salary, benefits, and career trajectory that would satisfy every concern my father had raised about my current situation. It would also mean abandoning everything Tyler and I had built together, walking away from the software platform just as it was gaining momentum, giving up the possibility of creating something significant in exchange for the certainty of joining someone else's organization. "I appreciate David thinking of me," I said carefully, "but I'm not looking to make a change right now." My father's expression shifted from frustration to something closer to genuine concern. "Son, at what point do you admit that this isn't working? You've been struggling with career direction for years. When do you stop chasing uncertain opportunities and focus on building real stability?" There was that word again. Real stability, as opposed to the imaginary security I was apparently pursuing through my partnership with Tyler. In my father's worldview, security came from established institutions, predictable income streams, and clearly defined advancement opportunities. Everything else was speculation, wishful thinking disguised as professional ambition. The irony was that if our meeting with the venture capital firm went well, I would achieve more financial security in the next 6 months than David had accumulated in his entire corporate career. But I couldn't explain that without sounding like someone caught up in entrepreneurial fantasy, someone who believed his untested idea was destined for extraordinary success. "I'm not struggling," I said quietly. "I'm building something that has real potential. I just need more time to see it through." He studied my face for a long moment, searching for signs of delusion or desperation that would justify more direct intervention in my career choices. What he saw instead was determination that he interpreted as stubbornness, commitment, that he read as inability to accept reality. "All right," he said finally. "But I hope you'll keep an open mind about other opportunities, especially if this venture doesn't develop the way you're hoping." The conversation ended with our familiar stalemate. Neither of us had convinced the other of anything, and both of us remained frustrated by what we perceived as the other's inability to acknowledge obvious truths. I returned to the kitchen feeling emotionally drained and increasingly dreading the formal dinner that was still hours away. The afternoon passed in a blur of family interactions that required constant emotional management. Answering questions about my work without revealing anything substantial, deflecting suggestions about real jobs I should consider, smiling politely while relatives shared updates about their children's conventional achievements. By 5 o'clock, when we gathered in the dining room for the main event, I felt like I'd been playing a role for hours. The dining room table was a masterpiece of holiday presentation. My mother had outdone herself with the formal china, crystal glasses, and elaborate centerpiece that somehow managed to be festive without blocking sightlines for conversation. 23 family members arranged according to a seating chart she'd revised multiple times to optimize for both conversation flow and family hierarchy. I found myself positioned between my cousin Sarah's husband, who worked in pharmaceutical sales, and my uncle's new girlfriend who taught high school mathematics. Both perfectly pleasant people who would inevitably ask about my work and expect coherent, satisfying answers that I couldn't provide without either lying or revealing more than I was prepared to discuss. As we passed dishes and settled into the rhythm of family dinner conversation, I caught my father watching me from across the table. His expression was thoughtful, concerned, and slightly disappointed. The look of someone who'd tried to help but been unable to break through what he perceived as stubborn resistance to practical advice. That's when the conversation took the turn that would define not just the evening, but everything that followed. The first course had barely been served when my cousin Bradley launched into what would become the evening's defining conversation. He was describing his law firm's recent acquisition of a smaller practice, emphasizing the strategic brilliance of the partnership structure and the impressive revenue projections for the merged entity. The beauty of corporate law, he explained, to the table at large, gesturing with his wineglass for emphasis, is that success is measurable. Billable hours, client retention rates, partnership advancement timelines. Everything has clear metrics and established benchmarks. My Aunt Linda nodded approvingly. That's exactly what Robert was saying earlier about career stability. You need concrete goals and measurable progress, not just hopes and dreams. The comment wasn't directed at me specifically, but everyone at the table understood its implication. I felt heat rising in my chest as conversations gradually converged around the theme of professional achievement and quantifiable success. Speaking of measurable progress, my Uncle Jim interjected, turning toward my brother David. How's the promotion timeline looking at your company? Still on track for VP by 35? David smiled with the easy confidence of someone whose career trajectory had never been questioned. Actually ahead of schedule. The restructuring created some opportunities that weren't there 6 months ago. I should be moving into the senior director role by March, with VP likely by year-end. The table erupted in congratulations and questions about salary increases, stock options, and relocation possibilities. David handled the attention with practiced humility, downplaying his achievements while simultaneously highlighting the strategic decisions that had positioned him for advancement. The key, he said, warming to his favorite topic, is understanding that career development requires long-term strategic thinking. You can't just wing it and hope things work out. You need concrete plans, measurable milestones, and realistic timelines for achieving specific objectives. My mother beamed with obvious pride. David's always been so focused and disciplined about his goals. Even in high school, he had his whole career mapped out. Unlike some people, my father muttered, not quite under his breath but not loud enough to constitute a direct confrontation. The comment created a momentary lull in conversation as family members processed the obvious reference and decided whether to acknowledge it directly or pretend they hadn't heard. My sister Sarah, perhaps trying to deflect attention from the brewing tension, launched into an update about her residency program and her plans for fellowship specialization. But the damage was done. The implicit comparison had been made explicit, and now, every subsequent discussion of professional achievement would be filtered through the lens of my apparent lack of comparable success. Medical training is so structured, my cousin Jennifer observed. 4 years of medical school, 3 years of residency, then fellowship if you want to specialize. Sarah always knows exactly what comes next and when. That's the advantage of established professions, my Uncle Tom added. The path is clear, the requirements are standard, and the outcomes are predictable. You put in the work, you get the results. I could feel the conversation circling closer to me like a predator sensing weakness. Every comment about career clarity and professional structure was an implicit criticism of my own path, which appeared to lack both direction and substance. My cousin Kevin, fresh from his MBA program, decided to make the subtext explicit. It's interesting how different people approach career development. Some people prefer the security of established paths, while others— He paused meaningfully, looking directly at me. Others prefer to keep their options open indefinitely, thus. Word indefinitely hung in the air like an accusation. Kevin was only 26, but his acceptance of the investment banking position had already earned him full membership in the family's circle of professional achievers. His implied criticism of my approach carried weight because it came from someone who'd recently made the transition from uncertain student to established professional. I wouldn't say I'm keeping my options open. I replied carefully. I'm pursuing specific opportunities that require different timelines than traditional career paths. What kind of opportunities? Bradley asked with genuine curiosity that somehow felt more threatening than outright hostility. I mean, we all know you're working on some kind of business venture, but none of us really understand what that involves. This was the moment I'd been dreading all evening. Direct questions that demanded specific answers, asked in front of an audience that included not just immediate family, but extended relatives and family friends who would remember and discuss whatever I said long after the evening ended. It's a technology platform for small business management, I said, using the same generic description I'd given my father earlier. Inventory tracking, customer relationship management, and operational efficiency tools. That sounds interesting, my Uncle Jim said politely. How many employees do you have? It's just the two of us right now, me and my business partner. So you're not actually employees, Kevin observed with the precision of someone trained in financial analysis. You're founders, which means you're not drawing salaries yet. The question wasn't really a question, but an observation designed to highlight the precarious nature of my situation. Kevin understood startup economics well enough to know that founders typically reinvested everything back into the business during early stages, living on savings or minimal distributions while building toward eventual profitability or investment. That's correct, I admitted. We're reinvesting everything into platform development and client acquisition. How long have you been doing this? My Aunt Linda asked, her tone reflecting growing concern about my financial situation. About 6 months in this iteration, but I've been working in related areas for several years. The phrase, this iteration, was a mistake. It suggested that I'd tried and abandoned previous versions of similar ventures, that my current effort was just the latest in a series of unsuccessful attempts to create something viable. What happened to the previous iterations? Bradley asked with lawyer-like persistence. I felt sweat gathering at the back of my neck despite the dining room's comfortable temperature. The conversation had shifted from polite inquiry to something closer to cross-examination, and I was running out of ways to deflect without either lying or revealing information I wasn't prepared to share. Different approaches to similar problems, I said vaguely. Market timing, technical challenges, partnership issues, the usual startup variables. Partnership issues, my father repeated, latching onto the phrase with obvious concern. What kind of partnership issues? This was dangerous territory. My previous attempt at entrepreneurship had indeed failed due to partnership conflicts, but explaining that would require discussing my former business partner's decision to accept a corporate position rather than continue building our marketing consultancy. The story would only reinforce my family's perception that I was drawn to unstable situations and unreliable collaborators. Nothing dramatic, I said. Just different visions for company direction and growth strategy. So your business partner abandoned the venture, Kevin summarized with brutal clarity. Left you to either continue alone or start over with someone else. The conversation had taken on a momentum of its own. Each answer I provided seemed to generate additional questions that revealed more problematic aspects of my situation. I was trapped in a downward spiral of disclosure that was painting an increasingly unflattering picture of my professional judgment and prospects. That's a fairly harsh interpretation, I protested. Business partnerships end for lots of reasons. It doesn't necessarily reflect on the viability of the underlying concept. But it does raise questions about execution and sustainability, David interjected, his corporate experience lending authority to his analysis. Successful ventures require consistent leadership and long-term commitment. If you're cycling through business partners, that suggests either poor initial partner selection or inability to maintain working relationships under pressure. My brother's critique was particularly stinging because it came from someone whose opinion carried weight with our parents. David wasn't trying to humiliate me. He was applying standard business analysis to my situation and finding it lacking by conventional metrics. One failed partnership doesn't constitute cycling through partners, I said. hearing the defensiveness in my own voice and hating how weak it sounded. "What about before that?" my Uncle Tom asked. "How many different business ventures have you tried over the past few years?" The question forced me to confront the pattern that had been building over my career, the freelance marketing consultancy that had never grown beyond solo operation, the attempted partnership with a web designer that had dissolved after 6 months, the business plan I'd developed for a content marketing agency that had never attracted sufficient initial investment. Individually, each attempt had seemed reasonable and promising. Collectively, they painted a picture of someone who started projects enthusiastically, but couldn't sustain them through the difficult middle phases where most businesses either found their footing or failed definitively. I've explored several different approaches to building a marketing and technology consultancy, I admitted. Each one taught me something valuable about market needs and business development. But none of them generated sustainable income, my father said, making the statement that everyone was thinking but hadn't yet articulated. The words hit me like a physical blow. Sustainable income, the metric by which my family measured professional success and the standard by which I had consistently fallen short. Everything else, creativity, autonomy, potential for growth, intellectual satisfaction, was secondary to the fundamental question of whether my work generated enough money to support an adult lifestyle without external assistance. "Not yet," I said quietly, "but building something significant takes time." "How much time?" my mother asked, her concern evident in both her tone and expression. "Marcus, we love you and we want you to succeed. But at what point do you acknowledge that these ventures aren't working out the way you hoped?" The question contained layers of implication. Not just concerned about my immediate financial situation, but worry about my long-term prospects, my ability to support a family eventually, and my capacity to take care of myself without relying on others. In her mind, my continued pursuit of uncertain opportunities was preventing me from building the kind of stable, secure life that would allow her to stop worrying about my future. "I'm not ready to acknowledge that," I replied, though even as I said it, I could hear how unreasonable it sounded to people who valued predictability and proven results over speculation and potential. "Then when?" my father pressed. "What would have to happen for you to admit that this approach isn't working and consider more traditional alternatives?" The question was a trap, but also a legitimate inquiry. If I said I'd give up after another year of unsuccessful attempts, they'd mark their calendars and begin planning intervention strategies. If I said I'd continue indefinitely, they'd conclude that I was delusional and incapable of realistic assessment. If I tried to avoid answering, they'd interpret my evasiveness as evidence that I hadn't thought seriously about contingency planning. "I think I'll know when I know," I said, immediately recognizing how inadequate the response sounded. "That's not an answer," Kevin observed. "That's avoidance of responsibility for making difficult decisions." The conversation had devolved into something approaching an intervention. Family members who'd started with polite curiosity about my work were now expressing genuine concern about my judgment, my financial stability, and my ability to make rational career decisions. What had begun as casual dinner conversation had become a coordinated examination of my life choices. "Look," I said, trying to regain some control over the narrative, "I understand that my path doesn't look conventional from the outside, but just because something is unconventional doesn't mean it's doomed to fail. Some of the most successful companies started as uncertain ventures that looked risky to outside observers." "But most uncertain ventures fail," Bradley countered. "The statistical reality is that the vast majority of startups never generate meaningful revenue, let alone provide sustainable income for their founders. Someone has to be in the successful percentage," I argued, echoing the response I'd given my father earlier. "Someone does," David agreed, "but usually someone with more business experience, more capital, better industry connections, and more realistic assessment of market challenges." The critique was devastating because it was both accurate and delivered with apparent concern rather than malicious intent. My brother wasn't trying to destroy my confidence. He was applying standard business analysis to my situation and finding it lacking by conventional measures of entrepreneurial readiness. "What exactly do you and this partner of yours do all day?" my Uncle Jim asked. "I mean, if you don't have paying clients yet, how do you spend your time?" The question highlighted another uncomfortable aspect of my situation. Tyler and I did have paying clients. Our beta users were providing valuable feedback and modest revenue, but I couldn't explain that without revealing how close we were to a potentially significant breakthrough. The venture capital meeting was still 3 days away, and everything depended on variables beyond our control. "We're developing the platform based on user feedback," I said, "refining features, improving functionality, and building relationships with potential clients." "So you're working for free," my cousin Sarah summarized, "providing consulting services without compensation while hoping that eventually someone will pay you for what you're currently giving away." The characterization was unfair, but not entirely inaccurate. We were indeed providing significant value to our beta clients at below-market rates in exchange for feedback and testimonials that would help us scale. In startup terms, this was standard practice for building proof of concept and market validation. In conventional business terms, it looked like working for free while hoping for eventual compensation. "That's not exactly how it works," I protested, but I could see that my family had already drawn their conclusions about the viability of my approach. "Marcus," my mother said gently, "we're not trying to discourage you from pursuing your dreams. But dreams have to be balanced with reality. You're 32 years old. At some point, you need to prioritize financial security over speculative opportunities. Especially," my father added, "if you ever want to get married, buy a house, start a family. Those things require stable income and reliable financial planning." The conversation had reached the point where my family was no longer discussing my current business venture, but questioning my fundamental approach to adult responsibility. In their view, my continued pursuit of uncertain opportunities was preventing me from achieving normal life cycle milestones that required financial stability and long-term planning. "I'm not opposed to those things," I said. "I just think there are different ways to achieve financial security." "Are there?" my Uncle Tom asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're gambling with your future based on optimistic assumptions about unlikely outcomes." The brutal honesty of his assessment sucked the air out of the room. No one spoke for several seconds as family members processed the directness of his critique and waited to see how I would respond. That's when my father delivered the words that would echo in my memory for years to come. "Face it, Marcus. You're 32 years old, still chasing pipe dreams, and you've got nothing to show for it. When are you going to grow up and get a real job?" The champagne glass slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor as silence enveloped the dining room. 23 family members sat frozen, their conversations halted mid-sentence as the sound of breaking crystal punctuated my father's devastating assessment. But what they didn't know, what none of them could possibly know, was that Tyler Chen was at that very moment sitting in his car outside their house, checking his phone for my text message confirmation that it was safe to come inside with the news that would change everything. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 15 seconds. 23 pairs of eyes stared at the shattered champagne glass, then at me, then awkwardly away as they tried to process what had just transpired. The formal dining room, with its careful holiday decorations and perfectly set table, had become the scene of my complete professional demolition. My mother was the first to move, rising from her chair with the practiced grace of someone who'd spent decades managing social crises. "Let me get something to clean that up," she said, her voice carefully controlled but unable to hide the disappointment beneath her hostess' composure. "I've got it," I said quickly, kneeling to collect the larger pieces of broken glass while grateful for any excuse to avoid eye contact with my family. The champagne had splattered across the marble floor in an abstract pattern that somehow seemed symbolic of my scattered career trajectory. As I gathered the fragments, conversations slowly resumed around the table, but with a subdued quality that indicated everyone was acutely aware of the emotional landmine that had just detonated. My cousin Bradley was making polite small talk with my Aunt Linda about her recent vacation to Florida. My Uncle Jim was asking David about his company's holiday bonus structure. Normal family dinner topics that felt surreal in the aftermath of my father's brutal assessment. But underneath the surface politeness, I could feel the weight of collective judgment. My father's words had crystallized what everyone had been thinking but hadn't dared to say directly. I was 32 years old with nothing tangible to show for my professional efforts. In a family of achievers, I was the cautionary tale about what happened when someone couldn't or wouldn't commit to conventional success metrics. My sister Sarah caught my eye as I stood up with the collected glass fragments. Her expression was sympathetic, but also helpless. She understood that our father had crossed a line, but she also couldn't argue with the substance of his critique. From her perspective as a medical resident working 100-hour weeks toward a clearly defined goal, my approach to career development probably did look undisciplined and unrealistic. "I'll take those," my mother said, appearing with a small dustpan and brush. She knelt beside me to sweep up the remaining glass shards, and for a moment we worked together in silence. "Are you all right?" she whispered, low enough that others couldn't hear. The question was loaded with complexity. Was I all right emotionally after my father's public humiliation? Was I all right financially given my uncertain income situation? Was I all right psychologically in terms of my ability to make realistic career decisions? All valid concerns that I couldn't address honestly without revealing information I wasn't ready to share. "I'm fine," I said, which was obviously untrue, but the only response that wouldn't lead to further uncomfortable examination of my life choices. She squeezed my shoulder gently before returning to her hostess duties, but I could see the worry in her eyes. In her mind, this dinner conversation hadn't just been about career criticism. It had been an intervention that I'd rejected, a family attempt to help that I'd resisted out of pride or delusion. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message that I checked surreptitiously while pretending to adjust my napkin. "Tyler. Outside. Ready when you are. This is going to blow their minds." I stared at the message, feeling a surge of anticipation mixed with anxiety. Tyler had no idea what had just transpired inside the house. He was expecting to enter a normal family dinner where he'd make polite conversation before sharing our exciting news. Instead, he was about to walk into the aftermath of my complete professional character assassination. Another text appeared almost immediately. "Tyler. Also brought the preliminary term sheet. Vencap wants to move fast. This changes everything." My heart rate accelerated as I processed the implications. Tyler wasn't just coming to tell me about a successful preliminary meeting with the venture capital firm. He was bringing actual documentation of their interest, terms, and conditions for potential investment that would transform our small software platform into a properly funded startup with resources to scale rapidly. This was the validation I'd been hoping for but hadn't dared to expect. Not just polite interest or encouragement to reapply in 6 months, but immediate, concrete expressions of investment intent. The kind of breakthrough that would justify every risk I'd taken, every conventional opportunity I'd declined, every moment of family disapproval I'd endured. But it was also arriving at the worst possible moment. 30 minutes earlier, this news would have been pure celebration. Now it felt like evidence that would either vindicate my choices or make my family's criticism seem even more justified if the investment somehow fell through. I typed back quickly, "Give me 5 more minutes. Big news deserves proper setup." The truth was, I needed time to figure out how to handle Tyler's arrival. Should I prepare my family for what was coming, risking the possibility that the investment terms might not be as solid as Tyler's text suggested? Should I let him walk in cold and deliver the news without context, allowing the shock value to speak for itself? Should I try to leave with him and share the news privately, avoiding the family drama entirely? Each option carried risks. My family's trust in my judgment was at an all-time low. Any buildup I provided would be filtered through their skepticism about my ability to assess business opportunities realistically. But allowing Tyler to arrive without context might create an even more awkward situation if he misread the room's emotional temperature. "Marcus," my father said, drawing my attention back to the table, "I want you to know that what I said wasn't meant to be cruel. It was meant to be honest. Sometimes we need someone who loves us to tell us difficult truths." The statement was clearly intended as an olive branch, an acknowledgement that his delivery had been harsh while maintaining his position that the substance was accurate and necessary. In his mind, he'd performed a difficult but essential parental duty by forcing me to confront reality about my career choices. "I understand," I replied, though understanding and agreeing were entirely different things. "We all want you to succeed," my mother added, trying to soften the conversation's emotional edges. "We just want that success to be sustainable and realistic." "Though, offer about David's company is still on the table," my brother said, clearly trying to be helpful. "I could make some calls this week, set up informal conversations with their marketing director. No pressure, just exploratory discussions about potential opportunities." The family was rallying around a solution that made sense from their perspective. David's connection could provide access to exactly the kind of stable, well-compensated position that would address every concern they'd raised about my financial security and professional direction. It was a generous offer that reflected genuine care for my welfare. It was also completely irrelevant given what Tyler was about to reveal, but I couldn't explain that without seeming either ungrateful for their concern or delusional about my current prospects. "That's very thoughtful," I said carefully. "Let me think about timing." The non-committal response clearly frustrated my father, who interpreted my hesitation as continued resistance to practical solutions in favor of unrealistic optimism about entrepreneurial ventures. "What exactly are you waiting for?" he asked, his tone reflecting renewed exasperation. "What would have to happen with this business venture to convince you that it's worth pursuing instead of more stable alternatives?" The question was perfectly reasonable and impossibly complicated to answer. What was I waiting for? Concrete proof that Tyler and I had built something valuable enough to attract serious investment interest. Validation that our software platform addressed real market needs in ways that could generate sustainable revenue. Evidence that my entrepreneurial instincts were sound rather than self-deceptive. All of which was about to walk through their front door in the form of venture capital, term sheets, and investment timelines. "I guess I'm waiting for more definitive information about whether we've built something that has real commercial potential," I said, which was technically accurate while being completely inadequate as an explanation. "And how long are you willing to wait for that information?" Kevin pressed, applying his MBA training to what he perceived as poor decision-making processes. "At what point do you cut your losses and pursue alternatives?" Before I could formulate a response, the doorbell rang. Thutai sound cut through our conversation like a blade, creating immediate silence as everyone turned toward the front hallway. My mother glanced at her watch with obvious confusion. She wasn't expecting any additional guests, and it was nearly 8 o'clock on Christmas Eve, an unusual time for unexpected visitors. "I wonder who that could be," she said, already moving toward the front door with the automatic response of a practiced hostess. My heart was pounding as I heard her footsteps in the hallway, followed by the sound of the front door opening and muffled conversation. Tyler's voice, polite and apologetic for the intrusion, explained that he needed to speak with me about an urgent business matter that couldn't wait until after the holiday. "Of course," my mother's voice carried back to the dining room. "Please, come in. We're just finishing dinner," but I'm sure Marcus would be happy to step away for a few minutes. I could hear them approaching the dining room, my mother making polite conversation about the weather, and Tyler responding with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he was barely containing excitement about whatever news he was carrying. "Marcus," my mother announced as they entered the dining room. "Your business partner Tyler is here. He says it's urgent." 23 pairs of eyes turned toward Tyler Chen, taking in his appearance with the collective assessment that families perform on anyone entering their intimate space. He was dressed in the kind of casual professional attire that suggested he'd come directly from something important: dark jeans, button-down shirt, sport coat that looked expensive, but not ostentatious. "I'm so sorry to interrupt your family." "Dinner," Tyler said, addressing the table with genuine apologetic tone while scanning faces to gauge the social dynamics he'd entered. "I wouldn't have come if this wasn't time-sensitive." "No problem at all," my father said with automatic politeness, though his expression indicated curiosity about what kind of business emergency would require Christmas Eve intervention. "I'm Robert Richardson, Marcus's father." "Tyler Chen," he replied, moving around the table to shake hands with my father, then my mother, then other family members as I provided quick introductions. I could see my family assessing him with the same analytical approach they'd applied to me earlier: professional appearance, confident demeanor, articulate communication style. He looked, in other words, like exactly the kind of business partner who might actually know what he was doing. "Would you like to sit down?" my mother offered, already calculating how to rearrange place settings to accommodate an unexpected guest. "We have plenty of food if you'd like to join us." "That's incredibly kind," Tyler said. "But I really just need a few minutes with Marcus. We've had some developments that require immediate discussion." The word developments hung in the air with tantalizing ambiguity. Business developments could mean anything from major problems requiring crisis management to breakthrough opportunities, requiring rapid response. Given the timing and Tyler's obvious excitement, my family was clearly hoping for information that would clarify the viability of our business venture. "Why don't you both step into the living room?" my father suggested. "We'll continue dinner and you can rejoin us when you're finished." It was a reasonable suggestion that would provide privacy for our business discussion while allowing the family dinner to proceed without further disruption. Under normal circumstances, I would have accepted immediately and handled Tyler's news privately before deciding how much to share with my family. But these weren't normal circumstances. I'd just endured public humiliation about my career choices and professional judgment. My family had expressed collective concern about my ability to make realistic business decisions. The timing of Tyler's arrival, combined with his obvious excitement, created an opportunity to address their concerns directly, rather than through continued vague explanations about uncertain opportunities. "Actually," I said, making a decision that would change everything. "If Tyler's comfortable with it, maybe he could share his news here. It affects our business partnership, and you've all been asking questions about what we're actually building." Tyler's expression shifted slightly as he registered the tension in the room and realized that his arrival had interrupted more than casual family dinner conversation. But his excitement about our news was too strong to be dampened by social complexity. "I'm happy to share if everyone's interested," he said, clearly eager to deliver whatever information he'd brought. "Though I should warn you, it's pretty significant. News that's going to require some major decisions over the next few days." My father leaned forward with obvious interest. After spending the entire evening expressing skepticism about my business venture, he was clearly hoping for information that would either validate his concerns or provide concrete evidence about the venture's actual prospects. "We're definitely interested," he said, speaking for the entire table. "Marcus has been quite secretive about the details of your partnership. We'd love to understand more about what you're building." Tyler glanced at me with raised eyebrows, clearly surprised by the family's level of interest in our business affairs. I nodded slightly, giving him permission to share whatever news he'd brought, while silently praying that it was as significant as his texts had suggested. "All right then," Tyler said, reaching into his jacket pocket and withdrawing a folder that looked official and important. 3 hours ago, I walked out of a meeting with Cascade Ventures, one of the most respected venture capital firms on the West Coast. He paused for effect, looking around the table to ensure he had everyone's attention. They want to invest $12 million in our platform. The silence that followed was qualitatively different from the earlier pause after my father's harsh criticism. This wasn't shocking disapproval or uncomfortable processing of difficult truths. This was a stunned recognition that everything they thought they knew about my business venture had just been fundamentally recalibrated. $12 million. Not $12,000 or $1,200,000, but $12 million in venture capital investment for the software platform that my family had dismissed as another impractical pipe dream. Tyler opened the folder and placed several documents on the table where everyone could see them. Official letterhead, legal terminology, specific terms and conditions for Series A funding that would transform our two-person startup into a properly capitalized technology company with resources to scale rapidly and compete with established players in our market. They want to move fast, Tyler continued, his excitement building as he shared details that I'd only dreamed about receiving. Term sheet signature by January 2nd, due diligence completed by the 15th, funding closed by month end. They're talking about expanding our team to 15 people within 6 months, opening a dedicated sales office, building out enterprise-level features that could position us for acquisition by major software companies within 2 years. My family stared at the documents as though they were written in a foreign language, which, in a sense, they were. Venture capital term sheets operated according to financial and legal frameworks that most people never encountered outside of business school case studies or entrepreneurship magazines. But the numbers were clear enough. $12 million in investment capital. Valuations that implied our small software platform was worth significantly more than anyone at the table had imagined possible. Timeline projections that suggested rapid growth and potential exit strategies that could generate life-changing financial returns. How, my mother began, then stopped, clearly struggling to process information that contradicted everything she thought she understood about my professional situation. How did this happen so quickly? My father finished, his voice reflecting a mixture of amazement and skepticism. Yesterday, Marcus was describing this as a preliminary business venture. Today, you're talking about million-dollar investments. Tyler looked at me with obvious confusion about the disconnect between my family's surprise and what should have been a natural progression of our business development efforts. We've been building toward this for months, he said. The platform, validation, the client testimonials, the revenue projections. Marcus didn't tell you about the preliminary meetings we've been having with potential investors? And suddenly, the full scope of my family's misunderstanding became clear. They hadn't known about any of it. Tyler's question hung in the air like a spotlight illuminating the gap between reality and my family's understanding. His confusion was genuine. From his perspective, our venture capital discussions had been the natural culmination of months of successful platform development and client acquisition. He'd assumed that I'd been keeping my family informed about our progress, sharing the excitement of each milestone as we built toward this moment. The truth was far more complicated. I'd been so focused on managing my family's expectations and protecting myself from potential disappointment that I'd shared almost nothing about our actual achievements. What I'd intended as prudent caution had created a situation where Tyler's news seemed to come from nowhere, transforming me from apparent failure to sudden success in the span of a single sentence. Marcus has been quite modest about your progress, my father said carefully, clearly trying to process information that contradicted everything he thought he knew about my business venture. We weren't aware that you'd reached the stage of serious investor discussions. Tyler's expression shifted as he began to understand the family dynamics he'd stepped into. Modest is one way to put it, he said, glancing at me with obvious confusion about why I'd hidden such significant developments from people who supposedly mattered most to me. Could you walk us through what exactly has been happening with your business? My mother asked. her hostess instincts taking over as she tried to create structure for a conversation that had veered completely off script. I think we're all a bit surprised by how quickly things seem to be developing. Tyler looked at me questioningly, seeking permission to share details that I'd apparently been keeping secret. I nodded, partly because the cat was already out of the bag, and partly because I was curious to hear him describe our partnership from his perspective. His version would be free from the self-doubt and defensive positioning that had colored my own explanations. Well, Tyler began, settling into the chair my mother had indicated. Marcus and I started collaborating about 8 months ago. I'd developed a software platform that could handle inventory management and customer relationship tracking for small businesses, but I needed someone who understood the sales and business development side. He spoke with the confident clarity of someone describing concrete achievements rather than theoretical possibilities. No hedging or qualification, no apologetic acknowledgement of uncertain outcomes. Just a straightforward explanation of what we'd built and why it mattered. The market research was pretty compelling, he continued. Small businesses were spending huge amounts of money on software systems that were either too complicated for their needs or too limited to actually improve their operations. We saw an opportunity to build something that was sophisticated enough to provide real value, but intuitive enough for business owners to implement without extensive technical support. My cousin Kevin leaned forward with obvious interest. His MBA training had given him frameworks for evaluating business opportunities, and Tyler's description was hitting all the right notes. What kind of market size are we talking about? In the U.S. alone, there are roughly 30 million small businesses that could benefit from better inventory and customer management tools, Tyler replied without hesitation. Obviously, not all of them represent viable customers, but even capturing a tiny fraction of that market represents significant revenue potential. The numbers were staggering, and I could see my family recalibrating their understanding of what we'd been building. This wasn't a hobby project or speculative experiment. It was a business venture targeting a massive market with software that addressed genuine problems experienced by millions of potential customers. How many clients are you working with currently? Bradley asked, applying his lawyer's instinct for concrete evidence to support broad claims. 47 active users, Tyler said, with another 38 in the onboarding pipeline. Our beta clients are reporting average time savings of 12 hours per week on administrative tasks, plus improved accuracy in inventory tracking and customer communication. I watched my family absorb this information with expressions ranging from amazement to confusion. 47 active clients represented a functional business, not a preliminary concept. These were real companies paying real money for software that was improving their operations in measurable ways. What's your revenue model? David asked, his corporate experience driving him to focus on financial sustainability rather than just market opportunity. Subscription-based pricing with 3 tiers, Tyler explained. Basic plan at $99 monthly for businesses with fewer than 50 customers, Professional at $249 for mid-size operations, and Enterprise at $499 for larger implementations with custom features. My Uncle Jim was doing mental arithmetic, calculating potential monthly revenue from their current client base. So you're generating somewhere around $8,000 to $10,000 monthly right now? Closer to $14,000, Tyler corrected. Most of our clients have opted for the professional tier because they want the enhanced reporting features and integration capabilities. $14,000 monthly. My family was processing not just the revenue figure itself, but what it represented in terms of validation for our business model. This wasn't speculative income based on projected growth. It was current, recurring revenue from satisfied customers who were paying market rates for software that solved their operational problems. And the venture capital firm is interested. Because, my Aunt Linda prompted, clearly trying to understand why sophisticated investors would be willing to commit $12 million to a business she'd never heard of until 5 minutes ago. Tyler's expression brightened as he moved into what was obviously his favorite part of the story. Cascade Ventures has been tracking the small business software market for several years. They've seen how companies like Shopify and Square have built massive valuations by focusing on underserved segments that larger software companies ignored. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to what appeared to be a presentation slide. Our platform addresses specific pain points that existing solutions don't handle well. Most inventory management systems were designed for large retailers with dedicated IT support. Most customer relationship tools assume businesses have dedicated sales teams. We built something specifically for the restaurant owner who needs to track ingredient usage and customer preferences, or the boutique shop that wants to understand buying patterns without hiring a data analyst. The specificity of his examples was compelling. He wasn't describing a theoretical market opportunity, but concrete problems experienced by actual business owners who'd become our paying customers. The venture capital firm sees potential for rapid scaling, he continued. With proper funding, we could expand our development team, build enterprise-level features, and launch aggressive customer acquisition campaigns. Their projections suggest we could reach 5,000 clients within 18 months. 5,000 clients. If the current average revenue per client held steady, that would represent monthly recurring revenue of approximately $70,000, or nearly $1 million annually. But venture capital firms didn't invest $12 million for million-dollar revenue targets. They were clearly projecting much more aggressive growth trajectories. What kind of valuation are they suggesting? Kevin asked, his investment banking background giving him frameworks for evaluating startup financial structures. Tyler glanced at me before answering, recognizing that we were moving into territory that had significant personal implications for my financial future. Pre-money valuation of $18 million, which means the $12 million investment gives them roughly 40% equity stake. The mathematics were straightforward, but the implications were staggering. If Cascade Ventures was willing to invest $12 million for 40% equity, they were valuing our entire company at $30 million. My 50% partnership with Tyler meant that my ownership stake was theoretically worth $15 million. $15 million. The number seemed impossible to reconcile with my family's assessment of my career prospects just 30 minutes earlier. I'd gone from being a 32-year-old failure with nothing to show for his efforts to someone whose business partnership was valued by professional investors at more than most people earned in their entire careers. The silence around the table was profound as family members processed the financial implications of Tyler's revelation. This wasn't just validation that our business venture was legitimate. It was evidence that I'd been building something with the potential to generate life-changing wealth while they'd been worrying about my ability to support myself with a conventional salary. "Marcus," my mother said softly, "why didn't you tell us about any of this?" The question contained layers of hurt, confusion, and recalibration. She was trying to understand not just why I'd kept our progress secret, but what it meant about our family relationship that I'd felt unable to share such significant developments with people who supposedly cared about my welfare. I didn't want to create expectations that might not materialize, I said, which was true but incomplete. Venture capital discussions can fall through for all kinds of reasons. I thought it was better to wait until we had concrete commitments. But you did have concrete commitments, my father observed. You had paying customers, recurring revenue, measurable business growth. Those aren't speculative achievements. He was right, and his observation highlighted the real reason I'd been secretive about our progress. I hadn't been protecting my family from disappointment if our venture capital discussions failed. I'd been protecting myself from their judgment. If our achievements didn't meet their standards for conventional success, Tyler seemed to sense the family dynamics at play and attempted to provide context that might help them understand my perspective. Marcus has been incredibly conservative about projecting outcomes, he said. Even with our current success, he's constantly focused on potential challenges and market risks. It's actually one of his strengths as a business partner. He balances my technical optimism with realistic assessment of what could go wrong. The description was generous, but also revealing. Tyler saw my caution as a valuable business trait, while my family had interpreted the same quality as evasiveness about questionable career choices. The difference was that Tyler had access to complete information about our achievements, while my family had been working with fragments and generalizations that painted an incomplete picture. "So what happens next?" Sarah asked, applying her medical training's focus on treatment protocols to what was clearly a business situation requiring systematic decision-making. "The venture capital firm wants to move fast," Tyler replied, referring to the documents he'd placed on the table. "Term sheet signature by January 2nd, due diligence process completed within 2 weeks, funding closed by month end. They're also talking about introducing us to potential strategic partners who might be interested in acquisition discussions down the road." Acquisition discussions. The phrase represented the ultimate validation for a technology startup, the possibility that larger companies might want to purchase our platform and integrate it into their existing product portfolios. Successful acquisitions could generate financial returns that dwarfed even optimistic revenue projections. "What kind of timeline are we talking about for potential acquisition?" Bradley asked, his legal background giving him familiarity with merger and acquisition processes. 18 to 24 months, Tyler said. "Obviously, that depends on our growth trajectory and market conditions, but Cascade Ventures has a track record of building companies to successful exits. Their average portfolio company goes from Series A funding to acquisition in about 2 years. 2 years. If Tyler's projections were accurate, I was potentially 24 months away from a financial outcome that would provide complete independence and security for the rest of my life. Not just enough money to pay bills and support a comfortable lifestyle, but genuine wealth that would create options and opportunities that most people never experienced." My cousin Jennifer had been largely silent throughout Tyler's presentation, but she finally spoke up with a question that cut to the heart of the family's confusion. "Marcus, if you knew all this was happening, why did you seem so defensive earlier when we were asking about your career plans?" It was a fair question that deserved an honest answer. My defensiveness hadn't been about protecting trade secrets or avoiding premature disclosure of business developments. It had been about years of accumulated frustration with family conversations that measured my worth according to conventional metrics, while dismissing approaches that didn't fit traditional career templates. "Because," I said slowly, "every family gathering for the past 3 years has included some version of the conversation we had tonight. Questions about when I'm going to get a real job, suggestions about more stable career paths, concerns about my financial security. I've been building something significant while feeling like I had to constantly justify why I wasn't following the same path as David or Sarah." The admission created another moment of uncomfortable silence as family members recognized the pattern. I'd described and considered their own contributions to the dynamic that had made me reluctant to share positive developments. "We were trying to help," my father said defensively. "From our perspective, you seem to be struggling with career direction and financial instability." "I know," I replied, "but from my perspective, you seem to be dismissing my choices before giving them a chance to develop. Tyler and I have been building this platform for 8 months. Tonight was the first time anyone asked specific questions about what we were actually accomplishing." The observation was pointed but accurate. My family's concern about my career choices had been expressed through general criticism and alternative suggestions, rather than detailed inquiry about my current activities and achievements. They'd been so focused on where they thought I should be going that they'd never asked where I actually was. Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly recognizing that his arrival had precipitated a family reckoning that went far beyond business news. "Maybe I should let you all process this privately," he suggested. "We can discuss the venture capital details later." "No," my mother said firmly. "Please stay. This is important information that affects Marcus's future, and we want to understand what it means." She turned toward me with an expression that combined regret with genuine curiosity. Help us understand what we've been missing. What should we have been asking about? What would have helped us support what you were building instead of questioning it? The questions were exactly what I'd been hoping to hear for months, but they were arriving in the context of dramatic revelation rather than ongoing conversation. Still, they represented an opportunity to bridge the gap between my family's understanding and the reality of what Tyler and I had created together. You could have asked about our client acquisition strategy, I said, or our revenue growth trajectory, or the specific problems our platform solves that existing solutions don't address, or what we'd learned from our beta users about market demand and product development priorities. Each item I mentioned represented a conversation we could have, had that would have provided concrete information about our business development progress. Instead of general questions about my career plans, they could have asked specific questions about our achievements and challenges that would have revealed the substance behind what they'd perceived as vague entrepreneurial aspirations. We didn't know those were the right questions to ask, David admitted. When you described it as a technology consulting venture, we assumed it was similar to freelance work you'd done before. His observation highlighted another aspect of our communication breakdown. My attempts to avoid premature disclosure had led me to use generic descriptions that resembled previous unsuccessful ventures, rather than clearly explaining how our current partnership differed from my earlier efforts. But now, with Tyler's documentation spread across the dining room table and $12 million in venture capital investment validating our approach, those communication challenges seemed trivial compared to the opportunities ahead. The weight of what had just been revealed settled over the dining room like a heavy blanket. 23 family members sat in various states of recalibration, trying to reconcile the Marcus they thought they knew with the Marcus who apparently owned half of a company valued at $30 million by sophisticated investors. Tyler seemed to recognize that he'd delivered information that required significant emotional processing, and he began gathering the documents from the table. I should probably head out and let you all absorb this, he said diplomatically. Marcus, why don't you call me tomorrow when you've had time to think about the timeline? Actually, my Uncle Tom said, speaking up for the first time since Tyler's arrival, I'd like to ask you something, if you don't mind. Tyler paused, clearly uncertain about what kind of question might be coming from a family member who'd witnessed the evening's earlier dynamics. Of course, Tyler replied, settling back into his chair. You've been working with Marcus for 8 months, my uncle continued. What's your assessment of his contributions to this partnership? From a business perspective, I mean. The question was loaded with subtext. My Uncle Tom was essentially asking Tyler to evaluate my professional competence in front of my entire family, seeking an outside perspective on capabilities they'd been questioning all evening. Tyler's expression grew thoughtful as he considered how to respond to what was clearly a sensitive family matter. Marcus has been absolutely essential to our success, he said finally. I'm a software developer. I can build platforms and solve technical problems, but I don't understand sales cycles or customer acquisition or how to translate technical capabilities into value propositions that business owners can understand. He gestured toward the documents he'd been organizing. None of this happens without Marcus's work on the business development side. The client relationships, the revenue model, the market positioning that attracted venture capital interest. That's all his expertise. My cousin Bradley leaned forward with obvious interest. Can you be more specific about what that involves? I think we're all trying to understand what Marcus actually does day to day. It was a fair question that highlighted how little my family understood about the practical aspects of building a technology business. Tyler's willingness to provide detailed explanation offered an opportunity to bridge that knowledge gap. Sure, Tyler said, clearly comfortable discussing business operations. Marcus handles everything related to customer relationships and market development. He identifies potential clients, conducts initial sales conversations, manages onboarding, processes, and maintains ongoing support relationships. He counted off additional responsibilities on his fingers. He also develops our marketing materials, manages our website and social media presence, coordinates with our legal and accounting advisors, and handles all the financial planning and investor communications that led to tonight's news. The list was comprehensive and impressive, representing far more substantial business activity than my family had understood. These weren't speculative or theoretical responsibilities, but concrete operational tasks that required significant expertise and generated measurable results. Additionally, Tyler continued, Marcus has incredible instincts about market needs and customer psychology. He's the one who identified the specific pain points our platform should address, and he's consistently pushed us to focus on practical usability rather than technical sophistication. My sister Sarah raised her hand slightly, like a student seeking permission to ask a question. When you say customer psychology, what do you mean exactly? Tyler's face brightened as he moved into what was clearly one of his favorite topics. Small business owners are incredibly busy people who don't have time to learn complicated software systems. Most existing platforms assume users want extensive customization options and advanced features, but what they actually want is something that works immediately without requiring training or ongoing technical support. He pulled out his phone and showed Sarah what appeared to be a customer testimonial. This is from a restaurant owner in Seattle who's using our inventory management features. She said our platform saved her 3 hours every week that she used to spend manually tracking ingredient usage and supplier orders. 3 hours weekly adds up to significant cost savings over time, Kevin observed, applying his MBA training to quantify the value proposition. For a business owner whose time is worth $50 hourly, that's $7,000 to $8,000 annually in improved efficiency. Exactly, Tyler agreed. And that's just one feature set. Clients who use our customer relationship tools report similar time savings on marketing communications and sales follow-up activities. My mother had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement. Marcus, why didn't you explain any of this when we asked about your work? This sounds like substantial business activity. The question cut to the heart of our communication breakdown. Tyler had just provided clear, compelling explanation of my professional contributions in terms that anyone could understand and appreciate. There was no reason I couldn't have shared similar information during previous family conversations. I guess I was worried about how it would sound if the business didn't work out, I admitted. It's easier to downplay something that might fail than to build expectations that might not materialize. But you weren't downplaying uncertain possibilities, my father pointed out. You were downplaying actual achievements. Tyler just described concrete business accomplishments that you've been hiding from us. His observation was uncomfortably accurate. My secrecy hadn't been about protecting my family from disappointment if our venture failed. It had been about protecting myself from their judgment if our achievements didn't meet their standards for conventional success. That's right, Tyler confirmed. They're already talking about introductions to potential enterprise clients and strategic partners who could help us scale much faster than we could manage independently. The scope of opportunity was becoming clearer as we discussed the practical implications of venture capital partnership. This wasn't just financial validation of our current achievements. It was access to resources and expertise that could transform our small platform into a significant technology company. But as the excitement of tonight's revelations began to settle, I found myself thinking less about business opportunities and more about family relationships. Tyler's arrival had resolved the immediate crisis around my professional credibility, but it had also highlighted communication patterns that had been damaging our relationships for years. The real question wasn't what would happen with Cascade Ventures investment, but whether my family and I could build better ways of supporting each other through uncertain transitions and unconventional choices. As if reading my thoughts, my father spoke up with a suggestion that surprised everyone at the table. Marcus, Tyler, I have a proposal for both of you. My father's words hung in the air with the weight of someone who'd clearly been formulating this idea while listening to our conversation about venture capital funding and business scaling challenges. Everyone at the table turned toward him with curiosity, unsure what kind of proposal could be significant enough to interrupt our processing of the evening's revelations. I've been thinking about what Tyler said regarding the need for experienced business guidance and industry connections, he began, his tone carrying the measured confidence of someone who'd spent decades making strategic decisions in corporate environments. Tyler and I exchanged glances, uncertain where this was heading, but recognizing that my father was approaching whatever he wanted to suggest with the same analytical framework he'd applied to insurance industry challenges throughout his career. Cascade Ventures is providing capital and general startup expertise, my father continued, but they may not have specific knowledge about the operational challenges that small businesses face when implementing new technology systems. He paused to ensure he had everyone's attention before delivering what was clearly the central element of his proposal. I've spent 37 years helping small and medium-sized businesses evaluate risk management solutions and operational improvements. I understand how business owners make decisions about technology investments, what concerns they have about implementation costs, and how they measure return on investment for new systems. The direction of his thinking was becoming clearer, and I could see Tyler's expression shifting from polite attention to genuine interest as he recognized the potential value of my father's perspective. "I'd like to propose serving as an advisor to your company," my father said directly, "not in any official capacity that would complicate your venture capital arrangements, but as someone who could provide practical insights about small business customer acquisition and market development strategies." The suggestion was completely unexpected. 20 minutes earlier, my father had been questioning my professional judgment and suggesting I consider conventional employment alternatives. Now he was offering to contribute his own expertise to help our startup succeed. "That's actually a really interesting idea," Tyler said slowly, clearly processing the potential implications. "Customer acquisition has been one of our biggest challenges. We've been successful with clients who understand our value proposition immediately, but we struggle to communicate effectively with business owners who are skeptical about technology solutions." My father nodded with obvious satisfaction that Tyler had identified exactly the problem he'd anticipated. Most small business owners have been burned by software systems that promised operational improvements but delivered complexity and frustration instead. They're naturally suspicious of any technology vendor who claims to solve their problems quickly and affordably. "How would you suggest we address that skepticism?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective, despite still processing the emotional whiplash of moving from criticism to collaboration within a single evening. "Credibility through association," my father replied immediately, suggesting he'd already given considerable thought to our marketing challenges. Small business owners trust other small business owners more than they trust technology companies. You need existing clients to become active advocates who can speak directly to prospects about their actual experience with your platform. Tyler's expression brightened as he recognized the strategic value of what my father was describing. "We've been collecting testimonials and case studies, but we haven't systematically leveraged them for customer acquisition purposes." Testimonials are useful, my father agreed, but direct peer-to-peer communication is much more powerful. You want prospects to have conversations with current clients who can answer specific questions about implementation challenges, learning curves, and measurable benefits. He gestured toward the venture capital documents still scattered across the table. "With $12 million in funding, you could develop a formal customer advocacy program that incentivizes your best clients to participate in prospect education and referral activities." The suggestion demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both our business model and the practical challenges we'd been facing in scaling our client base. My father wasn't just offering generic business advice. He was providing specific, strategic recommendations based on detailed analysis of our market positioning. "What would that look like practically?" Tyler asked, clearly engaged with the strategic framework my father was proposing. "Several components," my father replied. warming to the topic with obvious enthusiasm. First, identify your most satisfied clients and develop formal case studies that document specific operational improvements and cost savings they've achieved. Not just general testimonials, but detailed analysis of before and after metrics. He counted off additional elements on his fingers. Second, create structured opportunities for prospects to interact directly with current clients through reference calls, site visits, or industry networking events. Third, develop incentive programs that reward client advocacy through service discounts, feature upgrades, or revenue-sharing arrangements. The comprehensiveness of his framework was impressive, reflecting both practical business experience and careful consideration of our specific market challenges. This wasn't spontaneous brainstorming. He'd clearly been analyzing our situation while listening to Tyler's presentation. My mother had been following this exchange with obvious pride and amazement. "Robert, I had no idea you'd been thinking about Marcus and Tyler's business in such detail." "I've been thinking about it since our conversation this afternoon," he admitted, referring to our private discussion in his home office. When Marcus described their technology platform, I recognized similarities to challenges I've helped businesses address through insurance and risk management solutions. He turned toward Tyler with increased intensity. "The fundamental problem you're solving isn't really about software functionality. It's about helping business owners make better operational decisions based on more accurate and accessible information." "That's exactly right," Tyler agreed enthusiastically. "We've always described our platform as inventory management and customer relationship tools, but you're absolutely correct that the underlying value is improved decision-making capability." My cousin Kevin had been listening to this strategic discussion with obvious fascination. "This sounds like consulting work that could be quite valuable," he observed. "Are you thinking about this as a formal business arrangement?" The question highlighted practical considerations that hadn't been addressed in my father's initial proposal. Was he suggesting volunteer advisory support, or formal consulting engagement that would involve compensation and defined responsibilities? "I'm thinking about it as family support that happens to align with business opportunity," my father replied diplomatically. "I'd be contributing expertise I've developed over decades to help my son and his partner succeed with a venture that clearly has significant potential. But also," my Uncle Tom added with a slight smile, "expertise that could be quite valuable to a technology startup trying to understand small business market dynamics." My father's expression suggested he wasn't opposed to formal compensation arrangements, but he wanted to prioritize family relationship repair over financial considerations in how we structured any potential collaboration. "We should definitely explore this further," I said, recognizing both the strategic value of his expertise and the symbolic importance of his offer. "Tyler and I will need to discuss how advisory relationships fit with our venture capital arrangements, but I'm interested in understanding what you're envisioning." Tyler pulled out his phone and opened what appeared to be a calendar application. "Could we schedule a proper business meeting sometime this week? I'd love to hear more detailed thoughts about customer acquisition strategies and market development approaches." "I'd be happy to," my father replied. "Though I should mention that my offer extends beyond just strategic advice. I'd also be willing to make direct introductions to business owners in my professional network who might be potential clients for your platform." The additional offer was significant because it represented access to qualified prospects rather than just theoretical market insights. My father's 37 years in business-to-business sales had created extensive relationships with exactly the kind of small and medium-sized business owners who represented our target market. "How extensive is your business network?" Tyler asked with obvious interest in the practical implications. "Several hundred active relationships across multiple industries," my father replied. "Restaurant owners, retail operations, professional service firms, manufacturing companies. Most of them have trusted me with risk management decisions for years, which creates credibility that could transfer to technology recommendations." My sister Sarah had been quietly absorbing this conversation, But she finally spoke up with a question that addressed what everyone was probably thinking. "Dad, is this your way of apologizing for what you said earlier?" The directness of her inquiry created momentary tension as family members waited to see how my father would respond to explicit acknowledgement of the evening's emotional dynamics. "Partly," he admitted without defensiveness. "I made harsh judgments about Marcus's career choices based on incomplete information and conventional assumptions about professional success. Offering to help with his business venture is one way to demonstrate that I recognize the value of what he's been building." He paused to look directly at me before continuing. "But it's also a genuine business opportunity. Tyler and Marcus have created something with real commercial potential, and I have expertise that could help them scale more effectively. This isn't charity or guilt-driven family support. It's strategic collaboration that could benefit everyone involved." The distinction was important because it positioned his offer as mutual value creation, rather than condescending assistance from parent to struggling child. He was acknowledging that our business partnership had reached the point where outside expertise could contribute to our success, not suggesting that we needed rescue from poor decision-making. "I appreciate both the personal and professional aspects of what you're offering," I said. "And I think Tyler's right that we should schedule a proper business meeting to explore the details." My mother smiled with obvious satisfaction at the prospect of family members collaborating professionally rather than arguing about career choices. "This is wonderful. Robert has so much knowledge about business development that he's never had the opportunity to apply in a technology context. It could also help bridge the communication gap we've been dealing with," Bradley observed. "If your father is actively involved in understanding your business operations, family conversations about career planning will be based on shared knowledge rather than assumptions and generalizations." The insight was perceptive. One reason our family discussions about my professional life had been so frustrating was that they'd been conducted without adequate information about what I was actually building. Formal business collaboration would require detailed communication about challenges, opportunities, and strategic decisions. Tyler seemed to recognize the relationship dynamics at play and offered a perspective that might help frame the potential collaboration constructively. "Having experienced business advisors is incredibly valuable for any startup," he said. "Cascade Ventures provides capital and general strategic guidance, but industry-specific insights about customer behavior and market development are exactly what we need to complement their support. Plus," I added, "working together professionally might help us develop better ways of communicating about business challenges and opportunities in family contexts." My Aunt Linda had been following this discussion with obvious emotion. "It's beautiful to see you all finding ways to support each other's success instead of arguing about different approaches to career development." Her comment highlighted the broader family dynamics that had been affected by tonight's revelations. The evening had started with collective concern about my professional direction and had evolved into recognition that I'd been building something significant while they'd been worrying unnecessarily. "I think we all learned something important tonight," my Uncle Jim observed, "about asking better questions instead of making assumptions, and about recognizing that unconventional paths can lead to conventional success metrics." "Conventional, and then some," Kevin added with obvious amazement. "A $15 million equity stake isn't just conventional success, it's an extraordinary achievement by any standard." The number still seemed surreal to me, representing more financial security than I'd ever imagined possible through my entrepreneurial efforts. But equally important was the family recognition that my choices had been strategic rather than reckless, systematic rather than impulsive. "Speaking of extraordinary achievement," my cousin Jennifer said, "I think we owe Tyler our gratitude for being willing to share detailed information about your business partnership. We might never have understood what Marcus was actually accomplishing without your explanations tonight." Tyler looked slightly embarrassed by the attention, but clearly pleased by the family's positive response to our business development progress. "I'm just glad I could help clarify the situation. Marcus has been an incredible partner, and it's obvious that family support means a lot to him. It does, I confirmed. Even when that support comes in the form of tough questions and challenging expectations. I just wish we'd found ways to have these conversations without tonight's drama. Maybe that was necessary, my mother suggested thoughtfully. Sometimes families need crisis moments to break through established patterns and communicate more honestly with each other. Her observation contained wisdom that extended beyond our immediate situation. The evening's emotional intensity had indeed forced us to move past polite surface conversations toward more substantive discussion of values, expectations, and communication patterns. My father checked his watch and seemed to recognize that our impromptu business planning session had extended well beyond normal dinner conversation timeframes. Tyler, I don't want to keep you much longer, but I'm genuinely excited about the possibility of contributing to your success. The feeling is mutual, Tyler replied, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to meet Marcus's family and understand more about the support system that helped shape his business instincts. The comment was diplomatically phrased, but contained subtle acknowledgement that my family's high expectations and challenging questions had probably contributed to my careful, systematic approach to business development. As Tyler began gathering his documents and preparing to leave, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary transformation that had occurred over the past 2 hours. We'd moved from my public humiliation about career failure to collaborative planning about how my father's expertise could accelerate our startup's growth trajectory. But the most significant change wasn't in my family's understanding of my professional achievements. It was in our recognition that we'd been having the wrong conversations about success, support, and the relationship between conventional career paths and entrepreneurial ventures. Before you go, my sister Sarah said to Tyler, I want to ask one more question. Tyler paused at the dining room doorway, clearly curious about what she wanted to know. What advice would you give to families who are trying to support someone pursuing unconventional career paths? Tyler paused in the doorway, Sarah's question hanging in the air with the weight of someone seeking wisdom that extended far beyond our immediate family situation. Her inquiry about supporting unconventional career paths reflected recognition that tonight's events had revealed fundamental issues about how families navigate the tension between security and ambition, tradition, and innovation. That's a profound question, Tyler said, returning to his chair with obvious thoughtfulness. I think the most important thing is to separate concern about outcomes from judgment about the process itself. He looked around the table, clearly, formulating his response based on what he'd observed about our family dynamics throughout the evening. Marcus's family was worried about his financial security and professional stability, which are legitimate concerns, Tyler continued. But those concerns got expressed through criticism of his choices rather than curiosity about his progress. The result was that he felt defensive about sharing information that might have addressed your worries. My cousin Kevin nodded with obvious recognition. So instead of asking about revenue trends or client acquisition metrics, we were asking when he was going to get a real job. Exactly, Tyler confirmed. And from Marcus's perspective, sharing positive developments felt risky because it might create expectations that could lead to disappointment if things didn't work out as planned. My mother leaned forward with the expression of someone recognizing a pattern that extended beyond professional discussions. We do this with other topics too, don't we? Focus on our concerns instead of understanding what's actually happening. The observation was insightful and uncomfortable. Our family's approach to difficult conversations often involved expressing anxieties rather than gathering information that might address those anxieties more effectively. I think most families struggle with this balance, Sarah said. We want to protect people we love from making mistakes, but sometimes our protection becomes interference that prevents them from pursuing opportunities. Tyler's expression suggested he'd witnessed similar dynamics in his own family and professional relationships. The challenge is that unconventional paths almost always involve more uncertainty than traditional approaches. Family members who value security naturally worry about choices that don't provide predictable outcomes. But, my father interjected, we also learned tonight that unconventional doesn't necessarily mean uncertain. Marcus and Tyler were actually following a systematic approach to building their business, even though it didn't look familiar to us. His observation highlighted an important distinction between genuinely risky ventures and carefully planned approaches that simply didn't conform to conventional templates. Our software platform has been developed through methodical market research, beta testing, and iterative improvement based on customer feedback. That's a crucial point, Tyler agreed. There's a difference between entrepreneurial gambling and entrepreneurial strategy. The key is understanding which category a particular venture falls into, and that requires asking specific questions about methodology rather than making general assumptions about risk. Bradley had been listening to this exchange with obvious, professional interest. From a legal perspective, I work with entrepreneurs regularly, and the successful ones share certain characteristics regardless of their industry or business model. Such as, my Uncle Tom prompted, systematic approach to problem solving, realistic assessment of resource requirements, willingness to adapt based on market feedback, and clear metrics for measuring progress, Bradley enumerated. Those qualities are more predictive of success than the conventional nature of the business concept itself. I found myself thinking about how his framework applied to my own entrepreneurial journey. My previous ventures had indeed lacked several of those characteristics, particularly systematic methodology and realistic resource assessment. The partnership with Tyler had forced me to develop more disciplined approaches to business development. So, the question families should be asking, my cousin Jennifer summarized, isn't whether someone's career path looks conventional, but whether they're approaching their goals with appropriate planning and realistic expectations, and whether they're willing to communicate honestly about both progress and challenges, my mother added, clearly referencing our communication breakdown over the past several months. Tyler nodded approvingly at the direction of our analysis. Communication is absolutely essential. Entrepreneurship involves constant problem-solving and adjustment, which means families need ongoing information about what's working and what isn't if they want to provide meaningful support. We've learned that lesson the hard way tonight, my father acknowledged. Marcus felt like he couldn't share positive developments because we'd been skeptical about his general approach, which created a cycle where we became increasingly concerned about choices we didn't understand. The recognition of this pattern seemed to resonate around the table as family members reflected on their own contributions to our communication challenges. The evening had provided multiple examples of how assumptions and incomplete information had led to unnecessary conflict. I have a suggestion, my sister Sarah said, clearly building toward a proposal she'd been considering. What if we established better ways of staying informed about each other's professional challenges and achievements? Not just annual holiday updates, but ongoing conversations that help us understand what everyone is actually working on. The idea was appealing, but also potentially complicated to implement given everyone's busy schedules and geographic distribution. My brother lived in Chicago, Sarah was finishing her residency in Baltimore, and various cousins were scattered across different cities pursuing their own careers. Maybe quarterly family video calls specifically focused on professional updates, Kevin suggested, applying his business school training to family organization challenges. Structured conversations where everyone shares current projects, recent achievements, and upcoming challenges. That could work, my Aunt Linda agreed, especially if we focused on understanding rather than offering advice. Sometimes people just need family members who are aware of what they're dealing with professionally. Tyler seemed impressed by our family's systematic approach to relationship improvement. You're essentially creating accountability and support, structures that many professional organizations use to help their members succeed. Because we are a professional organization, in a sense, my father observed. We're a network of people with different expertise and experience who care about each other's success. We should be leveraging those resources more effectively. The reframe was powerful, positioning our family as a strategic alliance rather than just an emotional support system. From that perspective, my father's offer to contribute business expertise to our startup was simply effective resource allocation within our extended professional network. I love that concept, my mother said. Instead of worrying about each other from a distance, we could be actively contributing to each other's professional development. Tyler began gathering his documents again, clearly recognizing that our family conversation had evolved into long-term planning that extended beyond his immediate purpose for visiting. "I should let you all continue this discussion privately," he said, "but I want to thank you for including me in what's obviously been a significant family conversation." "Thank you for being the catalyst," my Uncle Jim replied. "Without your news about the venture capital investment, we might have continued with our misunderstandings for months or years. And thank you for helping us understand what Marcus has actually been building," my Aunt Linda added. "Your explanations provided context we should have been asking for all along." As Tyler prepared to leave, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey we'd all taken over the past 3 hours. What had begun as a routine family Christmas dinner had become a comprehensive examination of our relationships, communication patterns, and assumptions about success and support. "Tyler," I said, standing to walk him to the door, "I'll call you tomorrow morning to discuss the timeline and next steps with Cascade Ventures, and we should definitely schedule that meeting with my father to explore his advisory role." "Absolutely," Tyler agreed. "And Marcus, don't underestimate what happened here tonight. This kind of family support and understanding is going to be incredibly valuable as we navigate the challenges of scaling a technology company." His observation was perceptive. Entrepreneurship was inherently stressful and uncertain, even when things were progressing successfully. Having family members who understood what I was building and why it mattered would provide emotional stability that I hadn't fully appreciated until tonight. After Tyler's departure, our family remained gathered around the dining room table, processing the evening's revelations and planning concrete steps for improving our communication and support systems. The contrast with our earlier dynamics was remarkable. Instead of defensive positioning and critical assessment, we were engaged in collaborative problem-solving about relationship improvement. "I want to apologize to everyone," I said, addressing the entire table. "Not just for keeping information about our business progress to myself, but for assuming you wouldn't be interested in understanding what Tyler and I were actually building." "We all made assumptions," my father replied. "The important thing is that we've identified patterns we want to change and specific steps we can take to communicate more effectively." David, who had been relatively quiet during our family analysis, finally spoke up with an observation that surprised me. "Marcus, I want you to know that watching you build something from scratch has been inspiring, even when I didn't understand what you were doing." The comment was unexpected, given his earlier expression of concern about my career direction. "I always thought you saw my approach as undisciplined compared to your corporate path," I admitted. "Sometimes I did," he acknowledged honestly. "But I also envied your willingness to take risks and create something new instead of just climbing someone else's organizational ladder. Tonight helped me understand that your approach was actually more strategic than I'd realized." "My sister," Sarah nodded in agreement. "I've been so focused on following medical training protocols that I'd forgotten how much courage it takes to build something without established guidelines to follow." Their recognition of entrepreneurship as requiring specific skills and strategic thinking, rather than just optimistic risk-taking, represented a significant shift in family understanding. They were beginning to see that different career paths required different competencies, all of which could be valuable and respectable. "What I find most impressive," my cousin Bradley added, "is that you and Tyler identified a genuine market need and developed systematic approaches to address it. That's sophisticated business development, regardless of whether it follows conventional Career templates. The conversation continued for another hour as family members shared reflections about the evening's revelations and commitments for improved communication going forward. By the time we finally began clearing the dinner table, we'd established concrete plans for quarterly professional check-ins, more detailed information sharing about current projects, and strategic collaboration where our different expertise areas could provide mutual support. 6 months later, I found myself standing in the conference room of our new office space in downtown Portland, looking out at the city skyline while preparing for our monthly board meeting with Cascade Ventures. The transformation had been even more dramatic than Tyler and I had anticipated. Our team had grown from 2 people to 18 employees, including dedicated developers, sales representatives, customer success managers, and marketing specialists. Our client base had expanded from 47 beta users to over 800 active subscribers across 12 states. Monthly recurring revenue had increased from $14,000 to nearly $200,000. But the most significant change wasn't in our business metrics. It was in the integration of family support with professional achievement. My father had indeed become a valuable business advisor, contributing strategic insights about small business customer acquisition that had accelerated our growth beyond initial projections. His introductions to potential clients in his professional network had generated over 60 new customers and established credibility that made additional sales significantly easier. More importantly, our family had developed communication patterns that supported rather than undermined unconventional career choices. The quarterly video calls Kevin had suggested had become forums for celebrating achievements, brainstorming solutions to professional challenges, and coordinating strategic collaboration between family members with complementary expertise. My brother David had eventually decided to leave his corporate position to launch his own management consulting firm, partly inspired by watching our startup success and partly supported by business development strategies my father and I shared. With him, Sarah had been accepted into a competitive fellowship program that would prepare her for academic medicine rather than traditional clinical practice. Even my cousins had begun pursuing more entrepreneurial approaches to their established careers. The venture capital investment had validated our business model, but the family reconciliation had provided something even more valuable: a support system that encouraged calculated risk-taking rather than defaulting to conventional safety, that celebrated innovation rather than just security, and that recognized multiple pathways to meaningful professional achievement. As I prepared to present our quarterly results to the board, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The Christmas dinner confrontation that had seemed so devastating at the time had ultimately catalyzed the most important conversations our family had ever had about success, support, and the courage to build something new. Tyler knocked on the conference room door, interrupting my reflection. "Ready for the board meeting?" he asked. "The numbers look incredible this quarter." "More than ready," I replied, thinking not just about our business achievements, but about the family relationships that now supported rather than complicated my professional ambitions. The champagne glass that had shattered on Christmas Eve had been replaced by something much more valuable: understanding, communication, and collaboration that would last long after any single business venture had run its course. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the most painful moments. Sometimes families need crises to move beyond comfortable assumptions toward authentic connection. And sometimes the very people who challenge our choices most forcefully become our most valuable allies once they understand what we're actually trying to build. Walking into that board meeting, surrounded by the team we'd assembled and supported by the family who now understood our vision, I realized that success wasn't just about achieving financial goals or professional recognition. It was about creating the conditions where the people you care about can support each other's highest ambitions, regardless of how unconventional those ambitions might appear from the outside. The venture capital investment had funded our startup, but the family reconciliation had funded something even more important: the foundation for whatever we chose to build next. Looking for more? We've got two amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.